Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are talking about balancing performance and well-being, the role of leaders. A little bit random compared to the other episodes, but today we're talking about leadership and the workplace environment, which I think is super important to our well-being. And joining us in our virtual studio from Singapore is Zi Kit. Kit is the founder of Emote, a leadership development company focused on helping emerging leaders connect and engage their teams more effectively to achieve better results. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kit.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for that wonderful intro. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I am fascinated by the fact that you used to be here in Melbourne for a very long time. I'm guessing that's for your education. So I have to ask, what did you studied and why you started Emote?
So that's always an interesting question because of where I've ended up. But I studied something completely different. So I studied commerce at Monash University all the way back in 2015 or 16. And I majored in finance and macroeconomics. And so it's kind of strange how I've ended up in the realm of well-being and leadership development. Kind of long story short, didn't like banking too much. Much rather enjoyed people, and so went down that path. It was actually my time in Melbourne that got me down the people path. I took a kind of part-time job in a residential college as a well-being pastoral care um, professional in the residential colleges, and yeah, the rest was history.
Mm, very cool. And when did you found Emote?
I started that 2022. So
Ah,
we've been up and running for about a year and a half to 2 years right now. The timelines are all fuzzy. Feels like forever, but also feels like just yesterday that we
yeah.
started.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I find a lot of things that you said relatable. One, I also started in sort of the economics space and now ended up here very randomly. So I hear you, you started with one thing and then you end up with somewhere completely different. And I think, Melbourne is a good place to start thinking about people and well being, actually. I haven't been to many countries, but I think it's true. And the other thing that you said that was super interesting is the last part of this journey of founding Emote, because LMSL started in 2022 as well. So we've been around for similar amount of time, and here we are today talking about leadership and well-being, which I think is a really good topic because while at LMSL we focus on well-being overall, I think like having initiatives that are niche like yours, where well-being meets leadership, is important because what we've learned from the pandemic is that it's needed. And I think our audience probably know about this already, and we'll go into details soon. Before we get there, we've got an opening part we called Have You Met Kit? So we'll get to know you better through things that you love or things you would like to share with our audience. First of all, what's your favorite book?
Ooh, that's a tough one because I'm a big reader and I love reading. My favorite book has to be Man's Search for Meaning, and I read that close to probably 10 years ago now, and it still hasn't been dethroned.
Mm, very nice. I think I read it during the pandemic. That was actually recommended to me by my manager. So, perfect topic, very on topic with today. So, yeah, relatable. Thanks for sharing. And what about a movie you've enjoyed recently?
Ooh, I haven't watched a lot of movies, but I did watch June 2,
Ah,
which I thought was excellent.
mm,
I really enjoyed it. Watched it with my wife, and she's not a big sci-fi thriller person, and she loved it too. So it's got to be a pretty good movie.
yeah, I still haven't seen it. I'm so behind on the Dune train because I just kept trying to get IMAX ticket and ended up missing out because every time IMAX tickets get released, they get sold out so quickly, especially the good seats. So yeah, anyway, that reminds me I need to make it happen. Thank you for sharing that. So I think you said you've been on a few podcasts yourself, but I'm not sure if you listen to podcasts.
Big podcast listener. I think I spend most of my time that I'm not doing anything listening to podcasts. So a lot on the commute, um, on the way to and from work. Also at the gym, I'm just listening to podcasts all the time. But I don't listen to many podcasts that are relevant for my work.
Okay.
It's kind of my time and space to escape. So top of my list right now is a podcast called The Sweet Spot. It's
Hmm.
a golf podcast.
Okay.
And yeah, golf's my hobby. Gonna give that
Okay.
away as well.
Yeah.
2 in 1. So I love golf, and that's how I spend all my free time. It helps me clear my head. So
Mm.
I listen to podcasts about golf. It talks about equipment, everything, playing the game, but also the mental side, which is
Mm.
really cool.
That is cool. It's a good timing because my partner and I just got into golfing as well. So we're like, what are we doing? Are we doing this right? Like, should we get a coach? Like, what's going on? So yeah, that's good to know. The sweet spot. I'll recommend that to at least my partner and then anyone else who's playing golf. That's great.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that'd be perfect. They talk a lot about
yeah.
instruction and how you should learn golf and what are the best ways to pick it up. So that'd be perfect.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect timing for me, at least. I don't know about our audience, but this is great for me. Thank you. Uh, Next up, I would love to ask you about your role models. If you have one, if you have many, if you have none, or if not, you can just share about a few people that you look up to.
Mm. Don't have one in particular. Else- So I guess I'd have many, but it varies from time to time. If someone's in my view, or I've drawn particular inspiration from one single person, they become my kind of role model of the month or role model of the week. But essentially, anyone who has had a non-linear journey of entrepreneurship, I think I look up to immensely. I think I read a couple of weeks ago the story of Nike, and I can't really remember their name, but you know how they toiled away for decades pretty much before they became the company that they are today. So I think I look up to that as an entrepreneur, and also as someone who wants to make some big impact in the world. Right, that I've got to be patient and I got to keep working if I believe in something. So yeah, anyone who is an embodiment of that process of patience and hard work is someone I look up to.
Yeah, it's very on brand for you, especially because you started this journey recently. So that sounds great. And finally, I would love to know about a course you've taken that has really inspired you. This can be a course that you took a long time ago or something more recent. It doesn't have to be an academic course, by the way.
Oh wow, I'm not particularly a cause person because I don't like, not that I don't like learning. I don't do too well in classrooms and studying. I struggled all throughout uni, things like that. And I typically take courses because I'm inspired, and it has to be something that I'm inspired about before I go spend the money and sit down for hours at a time and do something. So it's almost the other way
Yeah.
around. But I would say that probably the most influential cause, or the one that's had a big impact on me, was
Yeah.
a cause run by this company called Influential You.
Hmm.
And they talk about the fundamentals of a transaction. So a
Oh,
transaction being, yeah, it's a pretty complicated sounding word. It's not as cold and calculative as it sounds. It talks about transactions as a reciprocal exchange, which is necessary for all of us humans to do anything. really. And
Mm.
that really opened my eyes to the world of entrepreneurship, business, but also how I view relationships and connecting and engaging people. So yeah, I would
Yeah.
say that one.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the first on this show. Never heard of a course about
I'll
transactions
drop
before.
you a link. I'll talk to you about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Talk to you about it
definitely.
later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds great. So we've got to know you a lot better. I think it's good to kind of know that you're not just all about leadership, well-being. You've got other things you want to share with our audience, which I think will be relatable for the next part of the conversation. So we're going to talk about well-being and leadership. So to start off, we always talk about well-being as a concept. It means very different things to different people. So what does it mean to you personally?
To me, well-being is a product. It's a product of habits and behaviors that accumulate in you being well and feeling well. So I think that's an opinion that I sometimes get heat for, and people get surprised with, because in
Mm,
in some way I do consider myself a well-being professional as well. That was my
mm,
background. So when I say that, oh, you don't do well-being, really, you just get your stuff in order and well-being comes to you. Some people like that and some people don't. um,
mm.
but yeah, I see
Yeah.
it as a product of everything we do.
Mm. I think that's a new perspective on this show. Very interesting. But combine that with what other researchers and professors have said on the show, I think it makes a lot of sense because a lot of people say, well being is not a destination, it's a journey, and there's no such thing as like a great state of well-being without some um, for example bad aspects of it. And even if you are not feeling well, it doesn't mean you don't have a sense of well-being. So I think when you say it's a product of what we do, it makes a lot of sense because that means if we are doing great things, having good habits, we have a good sense of well-being, and vice versa. So that's something new. Yeah, something different on the show.
Oh, cool. I hope to offer a couple of those today. So
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
start. Good start.
Yeah, definitely. Good start. It's something different because it's been 2 years we've been doing this podcast, so there are lots of different perspectives and definitions. I think this is the first time someone has used the word product when they talk about well-being. So that's a new one. Now, I wonder if you also have any new perspectives about this. So, as people have very different ways of viewing well-being, we all have different approaches when it comes to well-being, and that means some of us get it all wrong and we do the wrong things for our well-being, and we call those things misconceptions. So what do you think to be some of the biggest misconceptions that people tend to have about well-being?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same answer, that well-being is something that you can do and you can get. I think something that has been quite popularized in the last couple of years in the realm of well-being and mindfulness is kind of doing the certain exercises, and they promise that, hey, your well-being and your sense of well-being is going to improve. It might definitely improve. Not might, it definitely will improve, if you do a short meditation exercise or a breathing exercise and you're feeling a lot of stress in that moment, taking that time out and looking after yourself for the hour 2 hours that you do it definitely will help. However, I think the common misconception is that, don't really have to change anything else about my life, don't really change the habits and behaviors. If I pick up a couple of well-being habits or activities, if I exercise more, if I go to yoga more, that's gonna change the trajectory of my well-being. But
Mm,
I see it as, there are other things that we have to change as well.
mm,
I'm on the topic of leadership
mm,
and being a lot with workplaces, things like what we do for a career, or who are the
mm,
people that are around us, what we do outside of work and in work. These are all things that really affect well-being. And I guess a common misconception that I'd like to speak to, or I don't know, go against head on, is the kind of misconception that you don't really change anything. You don't change your career. You don't change your environment. and you pick up all these things and you're going to feel more well, which I don't really
Yeah.
agree with.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I think it's very interesting when you talked about, picking up, for example, yoga meditation, and then that will change everything. It will not change anything if we don't address other problems. So I totally agree with that. I don't think we have talked about that yet on the show. We have talked about something else that I find interesting, and I want to hear what you think about it, which is doing nothing. So you said it's like a sense of doing things, right? And the I think what's seemingly to be opposite is doing nothing. And a lot of professionals, well-being professionals on the show have talked about the fact that doing nothing is actually very impactful for our well-being too, not just doing something. So what do you think about that? Where do we find the balance?
Ooh, I love that. I love doing nothing.
Mm,
Wish I could do more of that for sure. And just as a disclaimer, I've got nothing against yoga or mindfulness. I love it. I have my own practices as well. And I think in a lot of ways that is kind of the space to do nothing, or at least think about nothing. So that's why golf is a big mechanism for me. It's something that I picked up right around the time that I started my business. And I really found solace in it because it was a 4 hour block that was carved out of my week where I didn't think about anything to do with work, and I didn't think about anything else other than being out in nature, looking at things, and hitting a ball, right, where my mind goes blank. So
mm,
that to me, yeah, that's really important, and I really like that idea of doing nothing. And I guess I didn't relate to it that way, but
mm,
golf is definitely my
mm,
outlet for doing nothing. And
mm,
right around the time where my well-being is probably the worst, early days of starting a company, lots of things to do, lots of long hours and working weekends and never taking a break. It was actually something that my wife kind of forced me to do, or said, hey,
mm.
you used to golf a little bit. Now that you're starting this, you stop that. Really think it's stressing you out. I think you should
Yeah.
do that every week. And I don't think there are a lot of
Yeah.
men out there who can brag and say that their wives want them to golf once a week. But that was definitely something that happened. So lucky me. And yeah,
Yeah.
good for my mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucky you. I mean, hopefully she hears that and will be very happy to know that, that is something you can brag about. And absolutely, it's
Yeah.
great. I think having partners or people in our life that support us to do nothing or to do things that we deprioritize because we are busy, that is also super important for our well being. And sometimes when we forget, we get a nudge like, hey, why haven't you done this? Doesn't have to be necessarily a partner, but I know for a lot of people they get nudges from friends, and that's great too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the latter part of your answer, you mentioned leadership, work, and professional life. That is a whole big topic in itself, and we probably will not have time to dive into every single angle. But we're here to talk about leadership. So let's start with that, and let's see if we can cover anything else. So I find it interesting because we've never had uh, a proper conversation on this show about how leaders can impact well-being of other people. So we all have leaders in life. I think even a boss would have somebody else that lead them in some other ways. So I think this is probably to just have as a disclaimer. I don't think it just applies to people that are holding regular jobs or like our regular employees, and it doesn't necessarily applies to people that are running companies like yourself. I still think each of us can benefit from understanding it a bit more, and we probably also lead others in ways that we don't imagine. I think leadership is kind of that flexible of a term. It doesn't just apply to professional life. So yeah, that's where I want to go with this conversation. Hopefully that's okay. And I would love to know from your perspective, what makes why is it so important? Actually, let's go backtrack. Why is it so important that we have good leaders? How do they impact our well-being?
I think first of all, you're spot on. Leadership is nothing to do with a position or a title. So when I talk about building more leaders and training leaders, I'm always speaking about just everyone. And to me, being a leader is influence. is having influence. And kind of like what you said, we all have people around us that we have influence on. It could be a partner, it could be friends, it could be a sibling. We have influence and we have the opportunity to help the people around us. But at the same time, we also have the opportunity to harm those around us if we're not being intentional and not being skilled in the way that we influence everyone. So I think that's a really good place to start in terms of what leadership is and why it applies to everyone. So aside from the titles and jobs and what we know as leadership positions, everyone is a leader, everyone has influence on the people around them. And
Mm,
that's where we want to start. Yeah, and that's also where I start training leaders too, is to stop seeing leadership as a position, but just the impact that you have on other people. So
mm,
going back to your question, kind of why is it important to have a good leader or have good leaders in our lives? I think goes back to that opportunity that I talked about, that everyone has the opportunity to help people or
yep.
to harm people. And in the previous question too, we spoke around about environment and the people that give you nudges. And so let's stay on that kind of topic and that metaphor. And if you have people around you that are nudging you kind of in the wrong way, are nudging you in the direction of where you're going to be stressed out and making the wrong decisions, that contributes to our well-being really, really tough, right? I'm sure we've
Yeah.
all had difficult bosses, difficult teachers, difficult partners at times that really piles on the stress and piles on the load. And at the same time, we've also all had those good teachers, those good bosses, or the trusted friends and family members around us that when we're with them and spend time with them, we just feel all that weight being lifted and all
Mm.
that stress being lifted on our shoulders. We feel safe, we feel well. That to me sums up the impact of what the difference between having a good leader and a bad leader is.
Hmm. Definitely. And I think for a lot of people, if they are tuning into the podcast, they might be here because they really want to learn more about this from a professional point of view. And I get it because, it's the title in the title. We said, leadership, performance, and well being. So aside from our overview of the picture, if we go in more depth and we talk about leadership in the context of the workplace, I think it's also important because on this podcast we've talked about this before. We spend at least 40 hours a week as full-time workers, 40 hours a week at work. So that's a very big portion of our time. And if we have a bad work environment or a bad boss, that impacts our well being. But I think a lot of people sort of discount how big of an impact that is. And since you train leaders, I would love to know from your perspective, maybe you've done some research on this, how good of an impact can a good leader make, and how bad of an impact can a bad leader make on our well being?
Oh man, I don't have many statistics on hand at the moment, so I can't quote numbers. But I did read somewhere a while ago. I think it was HBR that published a
Mm,
study that they had, and having a and the impact that a manager has on your well-being is more than what a therapist would have. So pretty important when you're thinking about the proportion of time and the proportion of impact on your well-being. So I
mhm,
think the top two on that list were tied for first place in terms of who in your lives had the biggest impact on your well-being.
mm,
The and the top two was number one, your direct manager at work, and number two is your romantic partner or your partner, right?
mm.
So pretty up there
Shocking.
as yeah, shocking. And so pretty much the second most important person in your life, when it comes to well-being, is your boss.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, shocking because probably not a lot of people paid attention to this. I did not know that. I knew that the bosses would have big impact on your well-being, but I didn't know it would be as much as my partner. That's shocking, scary as well. Because a lot of people might need to consider this when they decide to change careers or go to a new job. It's kind of a question mark with leaders and managers, and I think this is where it gets really tricky for a lot of people because they probably don't really pay attention to the long term impact. So, an example that I like to share is my friend, one of my best friends, got into this new job, and uh, when she was going through the interview process, she was really happy with her interviewer, i.e., her future direct manager. She got into the company, and then turns out that's not her direct manager because that person quit, and she did not have a manager at all. So, not having a manager at all and having a bad manager, I think, are quite of equal importance because they kind of have the same impact. Having no direction versus having like really confusing directions are both bad for our well-being. So what would counter this in organization, for leaders, right? Because I think it's not just the job of the leader to be a good leader when they're there, but also the job of the organization to nurture good leaders. For instances like that, when there are no leaders around at all, what should they do? Because they completely impact the employee's performance. And we were trying to talk about balancing performance and well-being, and clearly this is impacting both performance and well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think they're definitely unavoidably linked, right? The better you feel at work, the more empowered you are to do a good job, and the better job that you do, probably the less stressed out you are at work, right? So it's a never-ending cycle and kind of a chicken or the egg situation where they both feed into one another. That's also a really really big question. What can organizations do? And I think, to at risk of going into hours and hours of talking, because it's a very philosophical question that we can go on and on. I think the first and easiest thing that organizations can really commit to is listening and having really open lines of communication. Like, are you aware of what are the things that are going on with your employees? And can employees, if they are struggling or if there's something they're finding difficulty with, can they speak to someone? Can they look for someone who may not be their direct manager if they don't, like you said, have a boss? Is there someone in the organization who they can speak to, talk to, and potentially change their circumstances? I think I'll go back to the analogy again of the close friend and the close family.
Yeah.
You know, if you have someone like that in your life, just speaking to them sometimes about difficulty in your life, you can feel how, you just feel better speaking to these people, right? Being able to get
Yeah.
something off your chest and having someone to empathize with you and validate what you're feeling,
Mm.
right? Take that feeling and amplify it in organizations to have someone that employees can speak to, and then also have that person empowered to make a change, right? To make a change to their circumstances at work, maybe a little bit of the structure and how their job's actually being done. And that's also how we get more effective as organizations, right? Listening to pain points of the employees, figuring out how to make that easier so they are empowered to do their work better, they feel more well at work. Everybody wins.
So, Kit, as you said before, it's important to have good leaders because they impact our level of well-being, and the decisions we make at work can impact our personal life. And so, while we know that it's important to have good leaders, it's actually trickier for leaders themselves to know what good leadership is, especially since each of us, we're so different. And if a leader is listening to this conversation and they're kind of saying, okay, I get the premise. Like, my job is very important. I need to do a good job to improve my employees' well-being, but I need to balance performance. That's probably why they're here. So, for leaders that are listening, how can they balance performance and well-being for their team, their employees?
Yep. I think, well, I'll start kind of answering that question by saying that if you want to balance performance and well being of others, I would start by trying to balance the performance and well-being of yourself. I think that's really important and often really overlooked by leaders. I think leadership is a tough role. You're kind of looking after the people below you, and most of the time, like you mentioned earlier today, we also have people on top of us. Leaders have leaders too, so you're kind of getting, I don't want to say attacked, but essentially everything's coming in from all directions. So I think first things for leaders is, yeah, start to look after yourself, your own performance, and your own well-being. And one of the things that is really important for leaders being well at work is kind of what you said. Everyone is different, so everyone's leadership style is different, and I think leaders should find a style that is authentic to them. Don't try to be someone who they're not. I think we've all been exposed to pop culture imagery of what a good leader is, right? We've all watched, kind of heard of Steve Jobs and the way that he's led his company with a lot of yelling, really cutthroat, but also he can stand in front of the stage and inspire thousands of people, inspire the entire world with the words that he says. I think that's the worst thing that we can do as leaders, is to aspire to be that kind of leader if it doesn't come naturally to us. I'm pretty sure that Steve Jobs never had to try and become that way. He was just something that was innate to him, and that's why it could come out really naturally. So I think for leaders is, yeah, if you're a more soft-spoken kind of leader, if you're better at connecting one-on-one, do that. But if you're also really charismatic and really extroverted and you love going out and connecting with everyone and having a good time, do that. Do something that is authentic to you, because that's the way you can have it repeatable and create a very authentic experience and genuine connection with people. But also, it's just less tiring, right? If we're walking around trying to be someone that we're not, we're really self conscious about, oh, I shouldn't be this way, I should be another way. That's just a really tiring way to be and a really stressful way to operate, especially day after day after day for months at a time.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where I'd start.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good start. It does sound probably cliche to some people when they hear just be yourself, but it's important because you don't want to try to be somebody else, especially when you're leading a team. It's just going to be super weird if you're portraying yourself as somebody that you're not, and then you kind of have to keep that up, and it's tiring and it's going to drain you at the end of the day. So totally agree with you there. I'm a little bit biased because I'm also a leader myself, like, for my job title, let's say. So I can empathize with leaders. And I like the point that you mentioned before, being middle managers and you have somebody that you need to report to. I think even, like, actually, all of us, we need to report to someone. And For example, CEOs have a board of directors sometimes that they have to report to. They might have colleagues that will ask them about certain things or decisions they make, and then that sort of affect how they make decision and how they manage their team. And I think that is the toughest thing to balance because we get influenced by different sources, right? Like, for example, I am also sort of like you, soft spoken. I'm kind of like, I prefer uh, positive conversations with my team, which makes it really hard to talk about performance. And sometimes there are team members that are not performing well, but that's uncomfortable to me. So I'm not sure if a lot of our audience members can relate with this, but that's kind of my struggle. And then other people might have the opposite struggle, which is they always talk about performance. There's nothing to discuss on a personal level. It's never fun for their team members to talk to them. So I guess, it's kind of like the two ends of the spectrum. And either way, it's not that great. You kind of have to find the balance. You got to kind of somehow drag yourself to the middle, which is the hardest thing. Because, I'm like, I really do not like talking about the fact that this person is underperforming and I might have to put them on a performance plan. And I'm like, okay, here we go, not fun. And on the other hand, as I said, some people might be really good at these conversations, but their team just does not listen because they are like the worst person to talk to on a personal level. So what would be your advice to both ends of the spectrum? I guess is the question.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really cool. I did want to touch on a point that you mentioned at the start of the question was really valuable as well. Is that we all answer to someone, even if you're like the CEO of a company or like myself. I'm a solopreneur. I run my company on my own. Technically, I don't have a boss, but I answer to other things, right? I answer to financial commitments. I answer to the market. I answer to clients. There's always something, no matter where you are, what position you hold, or what you do for work. There are always external factors that we answer, and in a way, we are someone is our boss or something is our boss, even though they don't may not have a name or
Yeah.
a face. Which is really important to talk about in terms of stresses and well-being too, right? Recognizing who does have an impact
Mm.
on our well-being.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think what you said is um, so spot on. And you mentioned something like be yourself is such a cliched kind of saying in leadership. And I would agree, super cliched and probably the worst advice that I could give. I don't give advice to leaders to be ourselves because I think going back to how I started my definition of well-being as a product, sometimes ourselves suck and we're not the best, right? And we have to acknowledge that sometimes the things that we do, the people that we are at the moment, right, in our current capacity isn't good enough, isn't not good enough, but isn't productive and isn't effective for what we want to do. In the same way that sometimes we're all about authenticity and be yourself in terms of
Yeah.
well-being messaging. Sometimes you have to accept that, yeah, maybe I do sleep a little bit too late and drink a little bit too much coffee and don't exercise enough. We have to admit that what we do
Mm.
and ourselves actually need tons of work
Yeah.
at times. So for leaders, don't be yourself. Be something that is authentic to you in terms of style and the way that you like to connect. But kind of like what you're saying, I'm the exact same. I'm someone who loves to connect. I care immensely about people, and I use that to the best of my ability. But when I have to deliver bad news, that kind of gets difficult, right? Because we don't want to be responsible for hurting someone's feelings. Or most of the time, what I found is we just don't like to be the bearer of bad news. So that's an area that I kind of need to stretch into. So what I do at Emote is that there are always a couple of things that we need to tick as a manager, and being firm, having boundaries and firm expectations and consequences is one of them.
Mhm.
And so we need to learn how to be able to enforce these conditions
Mm.
of a good leader, of a good manager, while still being authentic to ourselves. So if I had to deliver bad news or if
Mm.
I had to pull someone up, you can be sure that I'm going to do so in a way that's extremely understanding, that probably allow them to listen or allow them to speak, and I'm listening a little bit more, but
Mhm.
still delivering the same message. I wouldn't go and suddenly change who I am and all of a sudden be this authoritarian kind of fist down kind of leader.
Yeah.
That would be horrible for the relationship that we
Yeah.
had, and vice versa for those people who are kind of firm down and fist heavy. It would be equally as strange and inauthentic for them to all of a sudden be a really kind person and really patient. And then people are just like, oh, who are you and what have you done with my boss? I don't
Yeah.
like this. I'm uncomfortable. And then you don't know which version of them they're going to get. So there are other ways that we can work through our personalities and our styles to deliver the results that we need to get, to deliver the impact that we desire while still
Mm.
being authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that authenticity is something that we constantly work on as well because authenticity would change as we grow as humans, not just professionals. But like I think you probably relate with this. 5 years ago, you're probably even more soft spoken than now. So now you're actually already firmer than before, and that's growth. That's a new version of authenticity. It's not that we're fake. I think it's just a really hard balance because sometimes we have to adopt skills and new things that we're so uncomfortable or we used to be so uncomfortable in, like delivering bad news. One example, just yeah, some people would just have this really weird way of delivering bad news, or they just don't deliver bad news at all and just avoid it completely. And I heard from my friend that HR delivered news for them sometimes, and initially I didn't understand, but now slowly as time goes by and I kind of understand the corporate world and how it works, it kind of makes sense because it's so tough for some leaders to actually deliver bad news themselves. So yeah, I think what you said is really valid. And one thing you did mention is the work at Emote that you do, and I find that to be probably the most valuable thing that we can share with our audience because from what I saw on your website, it seems like you do training workshops or even customized solution for organizations for leadership training, right? And as we know, there are so many things out there that might happen in an organization. It's hard to define a particular scenario or just give like a one size fit all solution. So maybe we you can share with us some of the common things that you notice leaders do that need to change. So this might either be something that they do wrong or something that they do that might not work for their team and they just need to improve on it. Some common themes you've noticed from clients you've worked with, or just based on the work you've done so far, and what they can do about it to change the situation.
Mm, yeah, that's a really good one. Um, I can answer that relatively easily. And I think the biggest kind of mistake, and I wouldn't call it a mistake, it's just a little bit of an unskilled manager way of managing,
Mm,
is a lot of unskilled managers lead the way that they like to be led rather than adapting it to the person in front of them, right? And I think that's completely normal and understandable, right? If I grew up with very limited leadership experience and leadership training, all I have to go off is what I like and what I don't like. And also, it's what I've experienced from my bosses and my leaders in the past. And, things that I've never experienced, I don't even know exist. All right. So sometimes we do find that in people who grew up with like one leader and one job and had a really harsh and like toxic kind of man. I don't really like that term, but for simplicity's sake, like a toxic manager, and they learn all these things about how to nurture, how to get the best out of people. And when they become managers, that's all they know,
yeah.
right? So they lead the way they have been led, or they lead the way that they like to be led. So going back to kind of the example from the previous question, I'm a really soft-spoken and really connected person, right? And I like to lead that way, and I like to be led that way too, with a lot of understanding, with a lot of nurturing, really gentle. However, if I have a teammate out there who's slightly more like type A, who likes things to be blunt, or maybe they don't like to talk to their boss as much and they like to let their work do the talking and they're really driven, then the way that I approach it, if it's just based on what I like to do and what I'm really comfortable in doing, I'm not really giving them what they need, right? And I'm not finding out what they need even. I'm just going like, oh, everyone around me is a mini version of Kit, and therefore I should lead them like they're all Kits. But that couldn't be further from the truth, right? So I think one way that we do combat that at Emote is a really simple framework. I think I learned it from John Maxwell and his leadership company. I think it sums it up perfectly, and it's in 3 steps, which is to listen, to learn, and then to lead. So how that works is listen to the person in front of you, right? Listen to what is important to them, listen to what they like, how they relate to information, how they like to learn, everything there is to what makes a person. Just ask them and listen, right? Then learn about them. Um, Listening is one way that we learn about a person and how they like to be led, but also observe how they like to work in groups, how they like to do work, and how they like to do everything, right? All their preferences and their little actions here. And then lastly, only after we've listened and learned, then do we take action and decide how we would like to lead the people in front of us, right? How we'd like to make an impact, how we would like to position certain things so that they're using their strengths and we're getting access to their strengths rather than just treating them how I would treat myself. And I think that's a really good framework to go, not just for leaders, but I've also taken it to personal relationships and how I deal with people in my personal life too, because it just reminds us and gives us a repeatable process of, yep, focus on the person in front of you first, and then change how you might say something or might present something or might treat them rather than just going from a me perspective all the time.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a good point for not just for leaders, but for people that are getting led and they're feeling so confused. Because I'm guessing, chances are, someone who's tuning into this podcast, they might be here because they are not happy with how they're being led. And so they want to change it or they want to find a way to give that feedback. So I think that gives a really good perspective because, sometimes uh, I think we think and we're quick to assume, and this is what I noticed when I first started my career, is that I thought that my manager didn't do a good job. I was very critical of them. And then now that I'm in a leadership position, I understand, you know what? Maybe they were doing the best they could. They just didn't know any better. They didn't know any better. And same as me, maybe I'm doing things wrong and I need to learn more. And so it gives perspective to both ends. And as long as we have a manager that is open minded, that's open to listening to ideas or feedback, that's important. So to me, it sounds like the most important thing in leadership, like you were saying, to listen and to be able to take that feedback. Because, if you listen without taking it on board, it doesn't really change anything.
Yeah, and you're so spot on. Isn't that just what we're all out here doing the best that we can, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that I always tell the people that I work with and young leaders is that you're just learning and you're trying. If you look at anything else that we do in the world, like if it's a hobby that we do or something that we're picking up or studies, nobody's good at it the first time, right? And it's only after like kind of falling on your face a couple of hundred times, failing and having it feel horrible, do we then learn. So when it comes to leadership, it's the exact same thing, just that a leadership failure feels a lot worse at times because you've made someone feel bad and that feels bad, or you've just not produced the outcomes that you want to produce, right? And that, yeah, it really has a big impact. But if you go back and kind of count all those leadership failures that you've had, the times that you've dealt with stuff that is not, you felt like you could have done better. And if you count that, you realize that it's just a couple of handful of things. And then you just got to remind yourself, how
Yeah.
many other things in the world have I done, have I tried 4 times or 5 times and have become good at?
Mm.
Barely anything, right? So
Mm.
it's about time and doing your best, a lot of
Yeah.
apologizing sometimes
Yeah. That's
and
so
learning as
true.
you go.
Yeah, that's so true. It reminds me of golfing. You're not hitting the ball at all when you first started. Like, hi,
Yeah,
same thing. It's just you just take it. You need to practice so that you can
yeah,
finally hit the ball correctly. I guess. Good sports
yeah.
analogy. Now, we
Awesome.
are we are here to talk about performance well-being. We've covered quite a few things, but if our audience are still here and confused, we have another section before we move on, and we call it Practice and Habits Debrief. And we would love to get your insight into something small, something practical. It could be a practice that you do yourself or a habit that you have or you would like to adopt and you would like to share with our audience about how they can become better leaders, how they can balance performance and well being in this context of, well being for everyone, including themselves.
Hmm. Right. Oh, wow. I can't quite put my finger on one singular
Mm,
practice. I think like what I said about well-being, it's just a whole web of practices that fall into to place eventually. But if I had to say one as kind of like a gateway for how I assess myself, whether I'm in a good spot, it would go back to listen, learn, and lead. And big emphasis on that first part, listening. So I think when I'm not in a good place. I've coming off a busy period, haven't had enough rest, hadn't had enough me time, haven't had enough exercise. I find that it really affects my ability to be there for somebody else. Right? If it's a client or if it's my wife or with friends, I'd be distracted and I wouldn't be able to listen. I wouldn't be able to listen intently and make it about someone else. And it's all about me, me, me. I want a nap. I need a rest. I'm really busy. And so when that happens to me, that's a like a trigger. Like, hey, I'm struggling to be the kind of person that I want to be for someone in front of me. That's uh, an indicator for me that something's out of sync. And that web of habits and behaviors that we spoke about in terms of well-being, something's out of sync there. So it's really an indicator of how I show up, and I use that as a test to see where my life is standing in terms of well-being elsewhere. And most of the time, when I'm struggling to be like a good person for someone else, and I'm getting kind of like really selfish and yeah, all those things that we talked about, it tends to be something that's out of balance. It tends to be I've been working way too long and that's affected my sleep, or I realize that haven't gone for a run in 2.5 weeks, and that's a pretty good sign for me to go change something and break that cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good practice and very similar to what you were saying at the beginning, listening to your own well-being, sort of, taking care of your own well-being if you're a leader, because that's how we all show up. It's really hard to bring good energy to work when we don't have good energy ourselves. And I think a lot of the time we just forget that. Actually, I remember this. It's funny because I asked my boss once. I was like, "Are you sure you're okay? What's going on with you and when all these issues?" I just, out of curiosity, I'm just curious. Like, can you share a little bit? And that was like my first time ever asking that question. And now that you sort of explain it, I was like, okay, so maybe it was a good thing that I asked. So actually, for our audience that are struggling with their manager, maybe they can ask that. Find a good way to go about asking the question, not like, "What is wrong with you?" but more like, "I've noticed that lately you have been different. Just wondering if you're okay." That might be nice for the manager to hear as well.
Yeah, 100%. Everyone listening, normalize checking in on your managers.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, definitely. I think that's such a good thing to do. Because when I'm like my grumpiest, it's always because I've got something going on, right? And I think it's the same pretty
Yeah.
much with everyone else. If you see that someone's like your manager's always high strung and really grumpy and really short with everyone and
Mm,
having to run from place to place and yelling at people, chances are they're not sitting in a super comfortable place themselves, right?
mhm.
So you never know what a small question like that could do for someone else,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a good thing because this practice can be turned into two different things. It from the leader side and also from the employee side. We can both have different practices we can do to kind of help with that end goal of balancing performance and well being. We cannot just rely on direct managers at all times to do this. It is a big job, but I think we can all do our parts as well because we'll be in both sides anyway throughout our career. Sometimes we'll be led and sometimes we'll lead others and sometimes we do both at the same time. So there you go. It's good to know. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. It's a really good practice. And finally, before we let you go, we've got open mic. As I mentioned earlier, it's your platform to share about anything you would like to share with our audience. I know you've got something in mind already, so go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for handing me the mic. I think what I kind of wanted to talk about was a new company that me and two other also learning and development professionals are creating. Is a company called Bros Before Woes. Supposed to be common wordplay on some masculine sayings that circulate in some school halls at times. But what it is the men's emotional intelligence kind of ground up initiative that we're starting. And yeah, I'll just tell you the story of how we started it. And how it's relating to the work that I do at Emote. But me and my friend who is also a leadership development professional, we were just chatting one day about difficult projects that we've had, difficult clients that we've had, and kind of work nightmares. And we started to stumble across the conversation around that a lot of the times where there were leaders that were the least receptive to kind of the work and problematic leaders, coincidentally, not saying that this is for everyone, coincidentally, a lot of them happen to be men, right? And they started to unpack the phenomenon together and talked about, why could it be men, and is it something about masculinity as a whole, or is it something that maybe most senior leaders statistically happen to be men, or more senior leaders happen to be men? So was it just a statistical occurrence, or is there something to unpack here? And as we went along with it and had this brainchild, it just kept turning up in the way that we worked, in the work that we were doing, that senior leaders, mostly men, a lot of the times had struggles with not their mental health or well-being, but they were pretty stressed out and pretty high-strung individuals, and that was impacting the way that they turned up at work, to their employees, for themselves, and also for their family, their wives, and their kids. And we're just like, oh man, there is something here. There is something here. So Bros Before Woes is kind of an initiative that we decided to start that will hopefully turn into some sort of learning and development company as well. But at the moment, what we're trying to do in terms of kicking it off is starting with some community events. So just places for men to hang out, where we have a couple of rules about what we have to talk about, or what we can talk about, and how we have to act. But just having a place where men can meet other men, talk about similar problems, and be there for one another. The second thing we're also trying to do is educational events, where we really start to unpack more specific topic based problems that men may face, right? To do with work, to do with relationships, to do with career and ideas of success, things like that. And lastly, what I talked about, like learning and development, we want to create a space for men to learn about manliness, to unpack kind of their lives and do the work. So that is kind of what I wanted to talk about, and that is the project that we have underway. And yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. I love that. It's amazing. I think a few years ago, I met someone on a camping trip thingy here in Melbourne, and they were saying that they have a podcast for men's mental health. And I was like, oh, that's such a great idea because, this is something that men probably don't talk about very often. And then now you have this initiative with your co-founders, I would call them. It sounds like very similar thing, and we do need more of that. So that sounds great. And I'm pretty sure the women that are listening, they're happy to know that you guys are doing this as well. So amazing job. And before we let you go, if our audience would like to connect with you to find out more about either Emote or Bros Before Woes, where should they go?
Yeah, the number one easiest place to find me is LinkedIn. So Zi Kit Toh, exactly the same as how you kind of see it spelled out here, on LinkedIn. And I don't know if there's another Zi Kit Toh around the internet. I not that I've come across, but so there should be the only one. And if there's more than one, it'll be the one that has Emote in his bio, and also Bros Before Woes. And from there, you'll be able to find all the other links. We are on Instagram, Bros Before Woes, and our handle is brosbeforewoes.sg for Singapore.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing a lot of wonderful things. And hopefully, we'll have you back another time.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I would love to be back again if you would have me, and hopefully, Bros Before Woes has progressed since then, and we have lots to talk about that because that's a really exciting project.
Yeah, we can talk about that project next time, hopefully. You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.